coming on the air with some breaking news from Washington in just the last hour. The House's top Republican getting the formal ask from the January 6th committee to tell them what he knows. We're talking about leader Kevin McCarthy, who apparently talked with former President Trump that day. Well, now the head of the January 6th committee says they'll subpoena McCarthy if they have to, if it comes to that, to find out more about those talks. We're going to break down what else they're looking for next. Plus, we're going to hit the scramble to keep schools open in this COVID surge and the new push to get you N95 masks sent to your house for free. Plus, our NBC News scoop on just how much trouble a GOP congressman might be in facing allegations of sex trafficking. Coming up, the explosive new details from Matt Gaetz's ex-girlfriend. Then, moms in the military are close to finally getting the care they need. We're looking at how a new law will help in today's original. And Novak Djokovic not helping his case to get into Australia for next week's Open, not after that new double apology about his travel documents and past COVID status. A former tennis pro joins us live with how this plays on and off the court. Hey, I'm Hallie, and we got a packed show for you tonight. We're getting right to that news about Kevin McCarthy, right? He's the top Republican in the House over what he knew about the attack on the Capitol and when he knew it. The January 6th committee's chair, Benny Thompson. Listen, this is all breaking in just the last couple minutes. And in just the last couple minutes, Benny Thompson has said he's interested in McCarthy's interactions with former President Trump, then White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, and other top officials. The letter also points out the congressman's comment on the House floor days after the insurrection, where McCarthy even acknowledged the former president did have some responsibility for the riot. Still, got a note here. McCarthy was one of the 147 Republicans who voted to overturn the legitimate results of the 2020 election. Now, a fair number of people that the committee has looked for information from have not played ball. But Chairman Thompson thinks McCarthy will cooperate. If he doesn't, they're not ruling out a subpoena. This is really significant news. I want to go to Sahil Kapoor on Capitol Hill. And Sahil, the reason why this is notable, right, the reason we're coming on the air as this is broken in the last 45 minutes to talk about it, is that we're talking about a man who, if Republicans win back the House in the midterms, which some political observers think is certainly likely could happen, he's very likely to end up as Speaker of the House, right? So this request for information is notable. It's also voluntary. It's not a subpoena, at least not yet, right?
Hallie, I just lost you there, but I think I know what you're asking me. This was a 6-page letter by the January 6th Select Committee asking for, as you point out, voluntary cooperation from House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy. They say they want to know about his conversations with former President Trump before, during, and after the January 6th attack. We know after the fact, McCarthy appeared troubled by what happened. He appeared shocked by what happened, said Trump bore some responsibility for that attack. Benny Thompson, the chair of the January 6th committee, says in a statement here, I'm just going to read from it, "We also must learn about how the president's plans for January 6th came together and all the other ways he attempted to alter the results of the election." Now, McCarthy, as someone who is understood to have spoken with Trump on that day, is central to this investigation in the sense that they're trying to stitch together what happened on that day and all the events that led up to it, and in large part, what the goal was, what the end game was, how much the president and the White House and the legal team knew about what was going to happen, and what their culpability is in precipitating that deadly attack.
Sahil Kapoor, who I believe is using his Hallie Jackson ESP to telepathically communicate since I think his IFB went down. Can you hear me yet, Sahil, or no?
I can hear you now, Hallie.
Oh, my God, it's a miracle. Thank you. So, Sahil, listen, I think it's important to talk about here Benny Thompson's optimism, because he just told one of our colleagues, House producer Kyle Stewart, that he thinks McCarthy will cooperate, right? He seems confident McCarthy will do that. But here's the thing, Sahil, you know as well as I do that Kevin McCarthy does not look highly upon this January 6th Select Committee. He thinks it's partisan, even though there are 2 Republicans that sit on that committee.
I'm not sure where Chairman Thompson's optimism here is coming from. Look, on a certain level, it's understandable that he is trying to remain optimistic right now. I mean, what is he going to say? I don't think he's going to cooperate. Then why put out this letter in the first place? He is trying to do what he thinks his job is, which is to go where the facts lead him. There is real evidence that Kevin McCarthy has some information, at least in the sense that he had conversations with former President Trump. They want to know what he said, what the then president said, And it is also notable that last May, our eagle-eyed colleague Hallie Talbot pulled up a comment from Kevin McCarthy saying, sure, when asked if he would testify about his conversations with Donald Trump at the time. So he has in the past indicated that he'd be willing to do this. But to your point, Hallie, Kevin McCarthy wants to be Speaker of the House. He knows he needs Donald Trump's support to do it. Any indication that Kevin McCarthy would be cooperating with this committee would make its way to Donald Trump. He would be very unhappy about it, put out one of his trademark statements, and it could endanger Kevin McCarthy's dreams of that gavel. So I would be very skeptical, regardless of what Benny Thompson says, that McCarthy will cooperate.
Just so I can do my due diligence here, I assume we have reached out to Kevin McCarthy's office and have not heard back about this yet, right?
That is correct. We have reached out to Kevin McCarthy's office as of the beginning of the segment. We had not heard back, and I'm checking now. We have still not heard back, according to my cell phone.
Feel free to check your email, because our other colleague, Aly Vitale, has just confirmed, as you and I were having this conversation on the air, Sahil, that Kayleigh McEnany, the former White House press secretary, has met virtually with the January 6th committee today. This is also very interesting. She was supposed to have a deposition initially in early December. That was postponed. This is according to a source familiar with the meeting. This is interesting, too, because Kayleigh McEnany was obviously, again, in the White House as this was going down, somebody who the Select Committee believes could have information that's important to their investigation. And by the way, she's a pretty familiar face, I think, to folks. She was the public face of the administration from the press response perspective for the end of the Trump administration, and was also a regular over on cable news.
And that news just flashed across both of our screens. It is certainly interesting because Kayleigh McEnany is someone who, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, was at the Trump White House till the end for the duration of his presidency. So she had proximity to the former president before, during, and at least for some point after the events of January 6th. And they want to know from her, as they want to know from everybody who was in that orbit, information that they had regarding what the White House knew, what they were planning, and what they did or perhaps didn't do on the day of. Hallie.
Sahil Kapoor. Sahil, thank you so much for that reporting, for that breaking news, as we're both checking our phones to keep up with all of it. Sahil, thank you. Not too far from where we are on Capitol Hill, you've got the White House, right, just down the road, scrambling to try to keep schools open, even with so many districts going virtual because not enough teachers were able to go to work safely. And the key, the White House thinks, to keeping the doors open, testing. The White House today promising to send out 10 million more COVID tests for K-12 schools. Plus, they've named a new testing coordinator. But here's the bazillion-dollar question, right? Will it help? Omicron is responsible for virtually all the COVID in this country right now, 98.3%. In the past 24 hours, there have been more than 900,000 new infections. To put that into context, 300 more people got COVID since I started talking about it just now. Over the last 2 weeks, COVID hospitalizations have gone up 84%, doubling in the states you see here in red, mostly in the West, the South, and New York. They're up in the Northeast. But today, the CDC director is reiterating that the Omicron variant actually is not as bad. It's not as severe as the Delta variant. After we heard, basically, brace for the inevitability, you will probably get COVID, they say, because the infection rate is so much higher with this variant. Our White House correspondent, Kelly O'Donnell, is here in Washington. Kelly, it's great to have you with us. Listen, we keep hearing about more and more schools going remote. Today, in your home state, in Cincinnati, right, it's happening. It's happening in the Twin Cities. Schools in Nevada, including in Las Vegas, are canceling classes for 5 days, starting on Friday. And now the White House is saying, OK, 10 million tests a month. Feels like a big number. When you crunch it, you got 50 million kids in public schools alone. Talk me through the plan here and what you're hearing from experts on whether it's actually going to work.
Well, the idea, as you know, is to use the test to stay philosophy, that if there are enough tests, they can keep classes open, and that is the goal. Kids in classrooms, they believe, is the better way. But when they're swamped with Omicron, it becomes a problem. So how to try to address that? Well, in some ways, there's a funnel of money that goes to schools from the American Rescue Plan, and that is one way to try to get tests into schools, as well as ventilation and other things, other kinds of mitigation. And now they're saying we're going to try to add 10 million more tests a month. They're also saying we're going to try to target those tests to schools that need them in high-need areas. Certainly, if you're looking for testing in places, if people, moms and dads, are trying to buy them on store shelves, that can be difficult. It can be hard to find those tests. So testing at school could be one solution. But do the numbers add up? Where do these tests come from if you can't get them at the store? Well, one of the ways the administration says they're going to try to leverage existing relationships they have with labs and businesses they've been working with, where the testing capacity may exist, but the numbers could quickly be exponentially kind of out of their league. But they're trying to address it by showing that they are looking to, especially at-need school systems, rural school systems, et cetera, where the school system will request these tests. They're not just going to drop them in places. Yeah. So there's got to be communication. But the numbers are tough, and the need is so great as the testing capacity is exhausted by the way Omicron is spreading. Of course, they're also saying school-age children are eligible for vaccines, and they'd like to have that go at greater numbers because children's vaccination rates are low, much lower than the administration would like.
There's another piece to this, too, Kelly, which is masks. And I think, listen, a lot of people are talking about this. The White House, I have to imagine, is looking at this behind the scenes, too. You've got the CDC suggesting they're going to maybe update their site about masks. They're strongly considering making better masks available to everybody. You had Senator Bernie Sanders today introducing a bill that would send everybody free N95 masks, 3 of them, right? Where's the White House on this? Is that something that they believe should be a priority?
Well, we've been asking that question, and when we see those sort of smoke signals, when there are rumblings, evidence of, for example, officials wearing the N95s that used to wear cloth masks themselves, when we see those sort of indications that there is a change in the actions of officials, the way they're talking about it, the encouragement coming from officials, we wonder if that is kind of pushing what will eventually be formal guidance. We have not been told that formal guidance is imminent. We're told they're looking at it. One of the difficulties is the availability of those masks, the counterfeit problem, and so forth. What they are saying is the highest quality mask you can get a hold of is what you should be wearing, and that the cloth masks are not providing enough protection, but a mask is better than no mask, and that certainly an N95 or a KN95, there are a variety of different types that are tight-fitting. Right. Those are the best. I've got mine right here. We wear them when we're not on camera, as you know. Yes. And that gives you more protection. And so we expect that there could be an adjustment, but it has not come yet. We're asking that every day, as you would expect us to, Hallie.
Kelly O, juggling her mask, her ringing phone. Maybe it's the president on the other line. You go pick it up. You go get it, girl. That's okay. We're glad to have you, Kelly. Thank you so much for that reporting. Here's another thing the White House is dealing with, right? The economy. President Biden saying inflation is too high and squeezing family budgets. And you are probably feeling this because there's this new report out tonight confirming what most of us already know. If we're like looking at our budget, we're paying more for basic stuff that wasn't always this expensive. According to December's report, inflation went up 7% over the past year. You know the last time we saw that big of an annual increase? The Go-Go's were top of the charts. That's a long time. Do you even know who the Go-Go's are? I had to Google it. Here's how this is affecting you, right? In the past year, the cost of filling up your gas tank went up almost 50%. You probably know that. There's a lot of reasons for that, but look at meat, eggs, bacon. Bacon prices alone are up 19%. Eggs, 11%, meat, 15%, housing, 5%. Some of this stuff is cents. Some of this stuff is real big dollars, but either way, you're paying a little bit more. At the same time, the money people are bringing home is not totally keeping up with costs. The average hourly earnings dropped more than 2% for the year. Ron and Sana is here to break it down for us. Ron, I'm so glad to have you on because I think you can speak in like regular human terms for people like me who are not economic reporters.
On occasion.
Listen, 7% increase, that feels like a big headline. But month to month, the rate of inflation is actually slowing down. Do you feel like this isn't as bad news as it might feel like right now?
Well, people keep trying to compare it to the 1980s. And I know, Haley, that you were not around when Belinda Carlisle was leading the Go-Go's in Our Lips Are Sealed and all those other songs that were very popular at the time.
I stan Belinda Carlisle, obviously, you know, but yeah.
Or the Bangles, for that matter. But look, the stagflation of the late 70s and early 80s included double-digit unemployment, double-digit inflation, and double-digit interest rates. This is not the environment in which we find ourselves now. And from my perspective, and I've been making this case for months now, the inflation we're experiencing here is the result of pandemic-induced supply disruptions. I think the Federal Reserve believes that that is largely the case. We've seen inflation decelerate. There is concern that it could become a little more embedded than people had anticipated, because although you showed wages down year over year, actually, in many cases, wages have gone up because of the shortage of labor that also exists as a result of the pandemic. And so many people have seen their wages rise at the same time that prices have gone up. And so they've been able to pay higher prices for basic goods. Where we're really having difficulties, computer chips to potato chips, everything that makes cars go and food get delivered to your home have gone up in price. And so I think that we're stuck there for a little while longer. But today's data, and we saw this in the behavior of the stock market and the interest rate market, was somewhat encouraging because it didn't get worse.
Which is good. Nobody got freaked out and spooked. I look at companies like General Mills, like Campbell's, like Kraft Heinz, which have already said they're probably going to raise prices in 2022. They also raised them last year. What needs to happen to get those prices down?
Well, you just need more supply. I mean, you really just need more stuff to come online. Now, we're not a huge grain importer, which is kind of interesting for the likes of a Kellogg or others. But again, the price of grain is not the biggest cost component when it comes to a box of cereal. It's marketing, it's shipping. Shipping has been a big problem for every industry. Transporting, whether it's overseas or overland, has been extremely costly. And we're short 100,000 truckers in the United States. So we have these bottlenecks that are keeping things from getting to the shelves. So we really need to adjust for all those problems before inflation comes down meaningfully. I think a lot of us believe that'll happen in the second half of this year, and we may struggle with this for the next several months.
Part of this, too, is that we know the Fed has hinted that they are likely to cut inflation, raise interest rates. I think I'm saying that in layman's enough terms. So what should we be doing? What should people be doing with their money, Ron, right? Like, if we know that this is probably going to happen, that the Fed's going to try to take these moves, should people be doing things different when it comes to 401ks or credit card bills, et cetera?
Well, credit card bills, tend to be higher interest rate expenses than normal interest rates. And they're not really pegged to the rates that the Federal Reserve controls. So when you're looking at a credit card, it's usually 15 to 20%. You want to pay that down if you can, if you have excess cash. Yeah, a mortgage. Look, mortgages are still historically extremely cheap. A 30-year mortgage is 3.6%. right now. That is not big money in the overall scheme of things. Just to go back to 1980 or 1981, my first car that I purchased, a used 1979 tan four-door Chevy Nova with a couple thousand miles on it.
Wow.
You have no idea how popular I was on college campuses with that car. The interest rate was 20.5%. So this is radically different. If you're about to buy a house, buy the house. If you're saving in the stock market for the long run, don't change your plans based on this. We're likely to see a stock market correction sometime this year. My thesis is that Main Street does better than Wall Street, but we've had 3 really, really strong years on Wall Street. And so slightly weaker performance this year would be expected.
Ron and Sana, please send a pic of you in the car back in 1981, pal. I'd love to see it.
And a full fro, by the way, if you'd like to see that.
It just keeps getting better. Ron and Sana, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, if you live in the Midwest and the Northeast, did you get a chance to try to thaw out a little bit today? If not, maybe tomorrow, right before you get another blast of intensely bitter cold. If you're in Florida or somewhere warm, count your blessings, because even though it got above freezing in New York yesterday, look at this. It was cold enough to freeze this fountain. You're about to see it. But everyone from commuters to construction workers were still out in the frigid air. And if you're not blown away by that frozen fountain, how about this? A fork full of spaghetti frozen in midair. That was on top of Mount Washington in New Hampshire, where it was negative 30 degrees. Al Roker is joining us live here. So, Al, what is the deal here, right? Listen, I say this every time we come on. You come on in the summer, I say it's summer, it's hot. You come on in the winter, we say it's winter, it's cold. It is, but it's really, really cold, right? Freezing yesterday. And this isn't over yet for people who are dealing with this, as we like to call it in the news biz, the bitter blast of cold air.
That's right. Hallie, we got a little bit of a reprieve today. 40 never felt so good here in New York City. But take a look at what's going to be happening, unfortunately, temperature-wise. Chicago, for example, tomorrow, 34 degrees. But by Saturday, down to 24 degrees. St. Louis, 50 tomorrow, 32 on Saturday. New York City, 46 degrees tomorrow. By Saturday, 20 degrees. Atlanta, 57, down to 50 by Saturday. Now, here's what we're watching. A big clipper system coming out of Canada is going to bring snow from the plains to the Midwest. Now, what we know right now, through Saturday morning, accumulating snow for the Midwest from the Dakotas all the way down into Iowa, anywhere from 6 to 8 inches of snow. Strong winds, blowing snow, near blizzard-like conditions. Saturday, the cold air meets this Gulf moisture. We're going to have a wintry mix to the north with storms to the south. What we know is Sunday, snow will develop across the Appalachians, and this is very dangerous, Hallie, significant ice storm possible for the Carolinas. The warm air aloft is going to meet that snow and change it and melt it down to rain. But then that rain is going to hit the ground, which is at 32 degrees or lower. And so we could be looking at significant icing from southern Virginia all the way into eastern Georgia. I mean, we're talking about power outages and big problems, standstill problems. Could be a real mess for airports of Atlanta, Raleigh on Sunday. Now, what we're watching, take a look. This storm system now makes its way up the coast. The location of the rain-snow line is still undetermined. We don't know where that's going to set up, but it will determine the rain-snow totals along I-95. If the track keeps along the coast, that would bring the heaviest snows to places like Roanoke, Pittsburgh, Washington, right on the border, Rochester, back to Knoxville. But if that track moves out into the ocean 50, 60 miles to the east, we're talking heavy snow along I-95, Boston, New York, D.C., Norfolk, Raleigh. And so right now, what we're looking for by Monday, heavier snow, inland sections of New England, inland sections of New York, and all down the spine of the Appalachians. But, Hallie, you know we're going to be watching this, and we'll come back tomorrow and bring you updates as to what we think is going to happen.
You better watch out, Al Roker. I'm going to hold you to that promise. Thank you, my friend. I appreciate it. And thank you for keeping us updated on everything we need to know. We want to go overseas, where today Russia is nowhere closer to backing down the 100,000 troops it has on Ukraine's border. With these high-level talks, the first time that NATO officials have met with the Kremlin since 2019. You see the American delegate there she is, Wendy Sherman. But right now, no new agreements, no breakthroughs, nothing that points toward de-escalation. Now listen, Vladimir Putin's reps are not apparently issuing ultimatums. They are insisting again that they're not planning to invade. It's just that American officials are pretty skeptical because the troops, they're still there. You're seeing them conducting live-fire military drills along the border. And given Russia's fairly recent history with invading Crimea, officials take the Kremlin's word with a gigantic grain, a boulder of salt. Andrea Mitchell is here to break this down for us. And Andrea, we're so glad to have you on, fresh off your exclusive interview with the woman we just saw, Wendy Sherman, the Deputy Secretary of State. And she pointed out something interesting, this idea coming from Russia that Ukraine is supposedly a threat to them. She's pretty dismissive of that.
Well, and for a very good reason, Hallie, Russia, Ukraine, Russia, superpowers, nuclear weapons. Ukraine gave up all of its nuclear weapons under a deal with the U.S. back in 1991, 92. Remember the Nunn-Lugar agreement from the Senate? They deactivated all of their nukes back then. They were part of the Soviet Empire, and they had nuclear weapons stationed on their land. And after the Berlin Wall came down and all that, so Ukraine is not a nuclear power, and since 2014 is just building up its military. To think that Ukraine, little old Ukraine, is a threat to big superpower Russia is laughable, and that's what she was kind of saying today. But she also said for the first time something interesting, that Russia, with all those troops, live fire exercises, as you point out, they don't have to invade, cross the border to face the NATO sanctions that were outlined for them in these meetings. They could do other things. They could turn out the lights in Ukraine, as they did back in 2014 and 15 with a big cyber attack. They could continue disinformation and misinformation and provocation, or a hybrid kind of attack. So she basically said this. Take a listen.
I think that if President Putin, either through invasion, coercion, subversion, hybrid attacks, some other way to undermine the stability and the sovereignty and the governance of Ukraine, if he takes action in that regard, the entire international community will respond in a way that lets him know that we know exactly what has occurred here.
And, geography is everything. Today, they were all at NATO. So it was 30 NATO countries, including the U.S., and NATO is a defense alliance lined up against Russia. And for 4 hours, telling Russia just what they would face if they took action. And Russia was saying, NATO, you shouldn't have expanded towards us, and you shouldn't allow Ukraine or Georgia or other former Russian countries, countries that were part of the Russian Empire, part of the former Soviet Union. You shouldn't let them become part of NATO. We find that threatening. So they were laying out basically their opening arguments. It wasn't a negotiation. Now we have to find out, as she pointed out, does Vladimir Putin really want to negotiate at all.
Right.
No one seems to know what it is he wants, and experts disagree. We've talked to a lot of them today. I was just back from a State Department briefing. They don't know what Putin wants to do. But why they worry? Why would he put 100,000 troops on the border if he weren't going to do something? Is it really like Vladimir Putin, the guy who takes off his shirt and goes, bare-chested, riding the horses and into the water and plays hockey? And they remember all those fake hockey games where he wins all the time?
Yes.
The goalie just sort of rolls over. Well, that's Vladimir Putin. And so is he really going to just have all those troops in there and then not do anything? That's scary.
Andrea Mitchell, those photos. Nobody wants to be the guy who blocked the Putin goal. You know what I mean?
Right.
In Russia. Yeah, Andrea Mitchell.
No one's heard from them again.
Yeah, seriously. It is great to have you on. Thank you so much for being with us and for that great reporting and great exclusive. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Coming up, you remember those accusations Congressman Matt Gaetz was facing for alleged sex crimes? We're getting some new signals just today that the case is heating up. The key witness who just testified before a grand jury and what that might mean for the Republicans' future in the story NBC News scooped in just a second. We are learning a lot today about just how serious those accusations of sex crimes against a Florida congressman really are. There had been speculation for a little bit, but now Matt Gaetz' ex-girlfriend has apparently testified to a federal grand jury, which might mean big trouble for Gaetz. Here's the deal. We know this investigation has been going on for more than a year. Now, legal sources familiar with the case tell us Gaetz is being investigated for 3 separate crimes: the sex trafficking of a 17-year-old, violating the Mann Act, which criminalizes taking women across state lines for prostitution, and obstruction of justice. We should note, Gaetz has not been charged. He has denied all of these allegations, saying he's never paid for sex and never had sex with a minor as an adult. The reporter behind this story, behind this scoop, is joining us now, Mark Caputo, I believe making his NBC News Now debut. So, Mark, it's great to see you, especially with a story like this. A hell of a scoop. Gaetz' ex-girlfriend has been talking to prosecutors about the possibility of this immunity deal for months. Now she's testified. Explain why this is so significant.
Well, it's so significant because, all prosecutors want to have the best evidence possible to make a case, especially if you're trying a congressman. And right now, the 2 main witnesses in this case appear to be the alleged victim of the alleged sex trafficking and Joel Greenberg, a man who was a former local county tax collector, Seminole County tax collector in Florida, who has loads of credibility problems. He's pleaded guilty to sex trafficking this very person when she was a minor, when she was 17. Also, he falsely smeared a rival as a pedophile. This is not the kind of guy you want to hang a case on if you're a prosecutor. The alleged victim in this case has far fewer credibility problems, but you're thinking, if you're a prosecutor, they're thinking in terms of a jury in kind of a conservative area in the Middle District of Florida. The woman now works in pornography and does sort of a hardcore pornography without being too graphic about it. So they also don't have, from what we understand, clear evidence showing that Matt Gaetz paid for sex with this 17-year-old or that he committed these other crimes. They need more evidence. They need someone who could kind of connect the dots, be a bridge between these gaps. And it appears to be his ex-girlfriend is that person. There was during one point at some point in 2021, Gaetz was on the phone with his ex-girlfriend and another woman in the case who was going to be speaking to prosecutors or the grand jury. And in that 3-way call, it was recorded by this third woman. It is suspected that Gaetz may have obstructed justice by trying to get people to lie or change their stories or whatever. He denies that, by the way. The ex-girlfriend appears to have been, or is alleged to have been by some, a part of that plan to obstruct justice. So she was facing a charge. Prosecutors were saying, look, we're going to charge you with this. She was saying, look, I have some testimony you might want. And in exchange for that testimony, she doesn't get charged. Now, we don't know if that immunity deal has been inked. But we do know that today she went to the grand jury and she spoke to them for a number of hours.
So that was my question of, sorry, Mark.
So there's an indication that she did get that deal. Her lawyer is a guy named Tim Jansen, by the way. He's based in Tallahassee, where I am right now. He has a reputation of being a master of the immunity deal. A few years ago, he got immunity for a man who admitted to committing murder in return for the man showing where the body was for the murder he had committed 17 years before. So this is her lawyer. He knows what he's doing.
First of all, that's fascinating. Second of all, I was going to ask about what else do we know about this deal that she may have cut here? Have we heard, listen, Gaetz has been vehement in denying this, right? This, though, and why I think this is so significant, why we're glad to have you on, I mean, people have been talking for a little while, right? I think people who were following this case, like, hey, maybe Matt Gaetz is in some trouble here. Boy, if this isn't the biggest flashing signal that, like, yes, he may really, really, really be in some trouble here, what else would be, you know?
That's hard to say. I mean, there can be other witnesses. We are unaware of any other evidence. Obviously, prosecutors, we haven't reported this yet. I haven't, but just a little tidbit of some of the stuff they've done. In one case at Joel Greenberg's gated community, they got the gate logs from 2017 to even find out the pizza man and the types of pizza that were being delivered. So it gives you an idea of how intense the focus from DOJ has been. Now, with that all having been said, you know, one of the problems with speaking quickly about this or doing relatively short stories that don't dive into the legal aspects of it, this is still not a slam dunk case. You're trying to prove that a person in 2017, a number of years ago, had sex with this minor and B, had paid for it. So those are two elements of the crime they have to prove. And in addition to that, Gaetz has money and he knows how to comport himself. And very often you've seen prosecutors are leery of bringing cases against high-profile public figures who have the money and wherewithal to defend themselves. So, you know, just because his ex-girlfriend is testifying does not mean that he's definitely going to get indicted. And just because he gets indicted does not mean he's going to be convicted.
That's so important. Wait, Mark, listen, you can't come on the show and say you don't have enough time to talk about stuff. What else? We're going to give you all the time you need. What is an important point that you think needs to be made about this story that hasn't been made?
Well, I think another one is the nature, and we have to write it this way. We have to report it this way, sex trafficking. When you think sex trafficking of a minor, you think of the original ambit or purpose of the statute, which was to prevent sex trafficking rings, people from getting lots of kids together, you know, trading them across state or even national lines and operating pedophile rings. What you have here with Gaetz falls under the ambit of the statute, but it is not the typical fact pattern that you see with most sex trafficking of a minor's case. This is a person who allegedly he had sex with when she was 17, just a few months shy of being 18. She was not being pimped, from what we gather. She was on a sugar daddy website called Seeking Arrangement, according to information gleaned from the indictments against Greenberg. And she had sold herself as being 18 at the time. Now, that having been said, the sex trafficking of minor statute has what's called strict liability, which means if you have sex with someone who's underage and if money changes hands, you are guilty of sex trafficking a minor, even if you thought they were 18, even if they showed you a fake ID, it doesn't matter. So there are some complications and nuances to the charge. There's some uniqueness potentially if prosecutors bring charges against Gaetz, because again, this is not your typical sex trafficking of a minor case.
Mark Caputo, we are so glad to have you on talking through this great reporting. Thank you for providing all the facts and all the context around it. We appreciate you.
Thank you.
Here on the show. It is a seriously not great week for Boris Johnson. Remember those parties during lockdown we told you he was hosting? Well, today he's apologizing for them, kind of. We'll explain why some people say it is not enough. Plus, Prince Andrew's lawyers, I should say, tried to get that sexual abuse lawsuit he's facing thrown out of court. Why a judge says not so fast. Let's get you over to the 5 things our team thinks you should know about tonight. Number 1, members of Congress and President Biden paid their respects to the late Senator Harry Reid today. He was lying in state at the Capitol Rotunda. You can see President Biden walking up just a couple of hours ago. The late Senate Majority Leader had pancreatic cancer and died last month at 82. He served in Congress longer than anyone else in Nevada's history. Number 2, a U.S. judge is letting a sex abuse lawsuit against Britain's Prince Andrew move forward. Virginia Giuffre alleges he sexually abused her when she was 17. The prince's lawyers tried to block the lawsuit, arguing he couldn't be sued because of a settlement between Giuffre and Jeffrey Epstein. A federal judge says, nope, that's not the case. Prince Andrew has denied all the accusations against him. Number 3, a traveler was arrested yesterday at an airport in Honduras after reportedly getting into the cockpit of an American Airlines plane and damaging it. This supposedly happened when people were boarding a flight headed for Miami. Number 4, the American Cancer Society says the number of people dying from cancer is going down. Why? Because of early detection and treatment options for lung cancer. That's a big part of it. This annual report says the overall death rate from cancer has dropped by about a third from 1991 to 2019. And number 5, just coming into us, Ronnie Spector, lead singer for the iconic girl group The Ronettes, has died after a brief battle with cancer. We've all heard her classics like Be My Baby and Baby I Love You. She was 78 years old. Let's head overseas now, because today was the day British Prime Minister Boris Johnson faced the music for attending a party at 10 Downing Street, right at the height of the 2020 lockdown. If you've been watching this show, you know we've been talking about not just this party, but others that have come to light that happened apparently during the really tough part of the pandemic. Johnson apologized, kind of, to Parliament. He said he went to the party for 25 minutes, said he thought this BYOB thing was a work event, but he did acknowledge the hypocrisy of it all. Listen to it for yourself.
I know the rage they feel with me and with the government I lead when they think that in Downing Street itself, the rules are not being properly followed by the people who make the rules.
Still kind of an open question whether Bojo survives this politically. You've got some members of the opposition already saying he should quit. Some people in his own party are not too happy either. Matt Bradley, 24 hours ago, promised he would come back and talk to us about this tonight. We have held him to that pledge. So, Matt, I'm glad to see you. Gorgeous backdrop tonight, too. What's the deal, right? I mean, we talk about how Boris Johnson has survived scandal after scandal, but this one feels like he's in some real crosshairs, even from his own party, at least not right now. Can he ride it out?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting question, Hallie, because, as I mentioned to you earlier on MSNBC, not only has he survived scandal after scandal, he's actually survived this very scandal. Parties that were held under COVID. This is not his first rodeo. This is like the third or the fourth time that he's been brought in front of the public to demand and ask questions about why he was partying when the rest of the country was isolating. So will he be able to weather it this time? Well, now there's a couple things against him. Before, obviously the opposition, the Labour Party, they made a meal out of all of these things, and they're going to be doing it again. They're doing it right now. And in fact, I want to show you a quote from Keir Starmer. He's the head of the Labour Party. Here's what he had to say during today's proceedings in Parliament.
After months of deceit and deception, the pathetic spectacle of a man who's run out of road. Is he now going to do the decent thing and resign?
So it's not just Keir Starmer, the opposition. He's always against Boris Johnson. The real problem for Boris Johnson is the opposition within his own Tory or Conservative Party. Those people, some of them his most loyal acolytes, they are drawing up articles to try to get him not impeached here. That's not what happens here. All they have to do really is get 15% of their own party to withdraw confidence from him, and he'll be put to a vote within his party. There doesn't need to be a national election. There doesn't need to be an impeachment. All he needs is a couple of people, 50 people, it's not a couple, it's more than that, 50 people within his own party to write letters and demand that he step down and they have a new internal party election. That could happen very soon.
He still has some allies in his own party, though, Matt, right? This isn't like everybody's unanimously against him here. There's some people who support him, some people who say, oh, no, that was actually a very sincere apology.
There are some people who were really pleased with his apology. And the fact of the matter is there are a lot of things here that anybody who's going to be outraged at this is going to look at. They're going to have to do a little inventory themselves of all the times that they broke the COVID rules themselves. And that happened, of course, all the time. We've been inundated with messages from people about how, they watched from remotely, heard about their parents dying or they weren't able to attend weddings or things like that. That's all, of course, very devastating and things that this government has to answer to. But at the same time, these were a lot of young people who were working at 10 Downing Street. 10 Downing Street is also the residence of the Prime Minister, so he didn't leave his home when he actually attended this party. And remember, those who want to see a legal consequence for the Prime Minister, that's going to be tough because at the end of the day, this is a really, really minor crime. It'd be like opening up a new investigation into a parking ticket 18 months ago. The police just don't do that, Hallie.
Matt Bradley, live for us there in London. I don't know where in London, Matt, but again, beautiful evening. Thank you for staying up late for us in the field. Coming up here on the show, moms who serve in the military facing battles on the front lines and here at home when trying to get proper health care. The new law that could be a major help when we come back. NBC News covers hundreds of stories every day, and because you couldn't possibly read or watch or listen to them all, our bureau teams have done it for you. This is what they tell us is going down in their regions in a segment we call The Local. First, from our Southeast Bureau, Florida Republicans filed a bill Tuesday that would ban most abortions after 15 weeks of pregnancy. It's similar to a Mississippi law that's currently under review by the U.S. Supreme Court. Florida Democrats say they're going to fight this. Our Northeast Bureau reporting all 17 of the people killed in that Bronx building fire have been identified. 8 kids died in the fire that happened on Sunday. The youngest victim just 2 years old. The city's medical examiner's office says all the victims died from smoke inhalation. And from our West Coast Bureau, the American Red Cross is warning about the country's first ever blood crisis. This is a problem in the LA area, and to get people to donate, the Red Cross will automatically enter donors into a raffle for Super Bowl tickets. That's in LA next month. People who donate this month can also win some other stuff, too. Now, to today's original in-depth reporting on a topic we've been keeping an eye on. Imagine, just for a minute, you were deployed to a war zone. You put your life on the line. You also had to worry about pumping breast milk. What about having postpartum depression and PTSD from combat at the same time? Well, the number of women in the military keeps growing, from 14% to 17% over the past decade. And calls to serve the maternity needs of this population keep growing, too. Our Aly Vitale explores how a new law is hoping to finally give moms in the military the care that they need.
After 20 years and 9 deployments in the Army, Vivian Richards knows all about readiness.
Readiness is like the biggest concern of any leader in the military, right? Do we have the personnel trained to the necessary level to go out and execute these combat missions?
But in 2010, she was also ready for a new challenge, motherhood. In becoming pregnant and then having her first baby, it became clear that the system, as it existed, was not necessarily built with her in mind.
When women integrated into the military, instead of going from gender-specific language like male or man, it was just kind of crossed out and put soldier. But that was not necessarily inclusive, right, of the female experience or the needs of a female soldier.
She gave birth at a military facility because of her active duty status, where, due to shortages of OBGYNs, neonatal nurses, and midwives, Richards says she never even met her doctor until she showed up to deliver.
When I got there, I had a medical team I'd never seen before. I've never met the nurse, I'd never met the doctor, I'd never met anyone.
It led to a birth experience that left Richards feeling unsafe. NBC News has reached out to the military facility but didn't hear back.
Yay!
Then, after 8 weeks of leave with her newborn, it was back to work.
While I did not deploy overseas within that window to a combat environment, I've had really close friends who are like struggling to like pump milk because they're still nursing their babies and they're on their way into a combat zone. And so there's a lot of commercials and media attention when a dad comes home and maybe is meeting their child for the first time. There's not a lot of coverage of a mother who leaves a 6-month-old baby and then comes back to a baby that's not walking and talking.
But Senator Tammy Duckworth, a fellow veteran and mom herself, is bringing that attention and legislating to fix it.
Protecting Moms Who Served Act of 2021.
The bipartisan Protecting Moms Who Served Act became law in December of last year, and it seeks to broaden the focus of veteran care to better serve the women who serve our country, pushing millions of dollars into streamlining maternity care at veterans' healthcare facilities and studying maternal mortality rates among veterans, the first study of its kind ever.
Why did it take so long to make these changes?
Not enough women in leadership positions. And as we've gotten more women into higher levels of leadership, this becomes an issue. And this, I was able to bring this up because I had my lived experience.
Now, Richard says it's about applying lived experience into legislation that works for everyone and flipping the military's perceived readiness narrative around pregnancy from Richard's experience.
Pregnancy is a threat to my readiness. Postpartum depression is a threat to my readiness. That bonding period after delivery is a threat to my readiness if I can't turn and deploy that soldier rapidly back into the fight.
To this.
You can't put our military in a place where for 15% of its workforce, we say, because you're going to get pregnant and that pregnancy has a negative effect on our readiness, you have to choose. Well, a lot of women choose to go and become moms and start their families and leave the military. That is millions and millions of dollars of training that goes out the door.
Aly Vitale is joining us now live. Aly, I'm so glad that you did this story for us. Thank you so much, because it is so important, right? And this law, what it does, another piece of it, study things that have never been studied for, like mental health among military moms. That is huge.
Among military moms, but also military-specific causes that can cause complications in pregnancies, and of course, maternal mortality rates for female veterans. That's one of the things that we've seen the Vice President's office bring more attention to. It was a key issue in the 2020 campaign, but certainly when you look at the numbers, around 20 deaths result from 100,000 live births, according to CDC stats from 2019. That number doubles for Black women giving birth. Right. It's a stunning problem, and the fact that there's so little data around it is also stunning, something that this bill seeks to fix.
There's also, I think, this, and you heard Richards talk about this, right? How men are perceived versus women when they hold their babies, that they're like, oh, women are bad moms for being in combat, et cetera. I mean, that is a stigma that exists, but you have people like Senator Duckworth who are trying to really push back against that.
But you heard her talk there about lived experience applying to legislation. And I do think that it's a moment where you have to step back and look at what reflective democracy can do for people, both in terms of demographics, having more women in spaces where policy is being made and where attention is being brought to issues that impact women specifically, but also lived experience for Duckworth as a female veteran herself. She's someone who was historic as the first lawmaker to give birth while serving as a senator several years ago. The fact that she had her daughter with her on the Senate floor during votes was something that was notable at the time, when really bringing your kid to work is something that moms do almost every single day. So it is a moment where you can look at inclusive lawmaking and inclusive democracy actually meaning that legislation works better for more people because you've got more people with different lived experiences actually building that policy.
Aly Vitale live for us on Capitol Hill with that. Aly, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Coming up here on the show, Novak Djokovic. He just cannot stay out of the news. This time, he's apologizing for what he did while he had COVID and admitting to a pretty big mistake on his Australian travel documents as he hopes to play on the Australian Open. We've got a former tennis player, Brad Gilbert, breaking it down next. One Instagram post, two bombshells from Novak Djokovic. First, an apology for what he says was a mistake on his Australian travel document. He's blaming his agent, saying he made an administrative mistake ticking the incorrect box about his previous trip to Australia. Previous travel before Australia, actually. The form said he hadn't been anywhere for 2 weeks before the trip, but he'd been seen in Serbia and in Spain. He also admitted he met with a journalist for an interview and a photo shoot after knowing he tested positive for COVID back in December. He called that an error of judgment. Keep in mind, these admissions are happening as Australia is still deciding whether to cancel his visa altogether. And there's a clock ticking down here. The Australian Open starts pretty soon. The whole reason he's trying to be there in the first place. Former tennis star and ESPN analyst Brad Gilbert is back with us to get into all of this. Brad, we couldn't let another day go by this week without bringing you on to talk about, as you call him, Joker, right? Public image-wise, like, let's set aside the tennis piece of this. Listen, we don't normally talk about Novak Djokovic on NBC News Now, right? We're not ESPN. Like, we don't cover sports, but he's in the news. He's been in there a lot. A lot of people know his name. And optically, what does this mean for him, do you think?
Well, every time good afternoon, Hallie. Every time Joker tries to do any damage control, it seems to get worse. And this time he's throwing his agent a little bit under the bus for filling out the incorrect form. And let me tell you, the Australian visa forms are tricky. But I don't know how you make the mistake of saying that you were in Serbia and Spain only in one country. Now Spain is actually backdating, looking into how he got into Spain unvaccinated, recently tested for having COVID, and he didn't have any special exemption. So they're now looking into it. So I think the federal government was pretty annoyed by him, getting this injunction from the judge. And so they're now looking into this technicality a lot closer, that he didn't fill out his form correctly.
The Australian Open is just a matter of a few days away, right? But it seems like this drama is all anybody can talk about. How much is this distracting from the tournament itself, or like undermining the purpose of it?
Well, most players, Hallie, would be fried mentally from this completely. But Novak, and Joker, as I like to call him, thrives on this. He's a kind of guy that does like bulletin board material and can use it. But remember, when he was in 6 days at that hotel. He didn't get to hit a ball. He didn't get to leave his hotel room. So he would be short of practice. And obviously, he has massive fan support there by a huge Serbian population that lives there. So I think that, and obviously this has been his most successful tournament, winning it 9 times.
Right.
I think he wants more than anything, not to be in the court, but to be on the court, the tennis court, doing what he can do best. But I think at the moment, this is still not his call by any means. And like I said, this is a fluid situation changing by the hour.
You make a good point. He could make some history here. He's the defending champion. This is his tournament. He's the guy that's known for winning it. This is a big deal to him personally.
Well, he's tied with Rafael Nadal and Roger Federer with 20 Grand Slams. If he were to win it, he'd get blackjack, 21. And I think this is a place that's obviously as special to him as anywhere because of the Serbian fan base. He doesn't have the fan base like a Rafael Nadal, like a Federer. But at this tournament in Melbourne, let me tell you, when he plays, there's 5,000 or 6,000 Serbians there every day wearing country colors, and they support him. And after his wins, when we do at night, when we're on the desk, they're out there singing and they, give him unconditional love. So I think more than anything, he would love to do it there.
Brad Gilbert, it's so good to have you on. I have a feeling this is not the last time we're going to talk about this saga as it continues. Brad, thank you so much.
I think it will continue on.
Appreciate it. Appreciate all of you for joining us this hour. We're going to be right back here tomorrow. Same time, same place. Coverage picks up right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.